These miniatures were primed using Vallejo's black primer. The steps in this video are mostly the same as the steps in the two previous videos where I painted other Necron units. However, I made a few tweaks here and there. Because of this, I'll keep most of this video brief as I don't want to spend too much time on ground already tread for those who may be watching this series. Instead, I'll focus more on the changes I made and why I made them, as well as some choices I had to make that were not present on the scarabs or the plasma site previously painted. If you want to see those videos where I spend more time on each of the layering steps, see the link above. They are also linked in the description. For the scarab swarms that I painted previously, my final shading for the coppery metals was done with bright red speed paint. However, when I painted the plasma site, I accidentally grabbed poppy red and used that for the final shade. I made mention that I thought I liked the poppy red better in that video, so I decided to paint one of these models from this unit with each and compare them side by side. I got way too heavy-handed with the final shades of the coppery metals, and I should have painted 10 to 20% of the surface area at the most, focusing on areas where light would hit the least. I probably covered 30 to 40% instead. A major issue I ran into after they dried was that I wasn't accustomed to doing these steps on larger smooth surfaces. The scarab swarms and plasma site models are incredibly small with little surface area, with the shell on top of the plasma site being the one exception. I was speeding through these since I was painting them all in assembly line fashion for each step, and I really should have slowed down here, being more mindful to ensure I apply this last shade evenly and not in jagged lines. Because I didn't take my time with this, I had to come back later and touch a few of these up with Nuclear Sunrise speed paint to help smooth the transition somewhat. Unfortunately, there are several places that are still painfully visible in the end. I like the bright red speed paint as a final shade on the first model, but when I swapped to poppy red on the second, I should have just stopped. My eye said, oh, this is very red. Because I had used so little on the plasma side, it wasn't a big deal. But on this warrior, it makes it look less like a dark shade of orange, and in the end makes the model feel anything but copper. In both cases, I just got too heavy-handed, and again, this should have only been on 10 to 20% of the model. And here they are side by side. The one on the left looks leaps and bounds better. And clearly the bright red speed paint made a much cleaner transition than the poppy red did. I start on the remaining metals, and here is where I make the first change, deviating from the plasma site formula I used. After painting the steely bits with 2 layers of Tyrian Navy, thinned in different ratios, I added a final shade with thinned down occultist cloak on the plasma site. I did not do that here as these areas were already pretty dark, and if I added the final shade, I think it would have been too dark, so I just moved on. Here is the second deviation that I made. Again, on the plasma site, I did another fine edge highlight using Vallejo's Model Air Silver after this one. I removed that step here for 2 reasons. The first being that there's enough silver still shining through the speed paint where I only coated it with the first thin layer, and 2, there are 10 miniatures in this unit, and it took me hours to edge highlight them this go around. I simply didn't fancy round 2. This is a picture of Necron warriors from GW that I loosely based my color scheme on. As I looked these over, I saw some things that, to my mind, just didn't sit well. Obviously, it wasn't a gripe with the painting, as whomever painted these are leagues better than I am. It was just a choice of the colors used on the gun, and to be more specific, I thought the copper coils on the gun were going to glow green. I also didn't expect there to be a green glowing cable. I initially thought the green cable was supposed to be a transparent tube and the glowing effect was the energy of what was flowing through it, but no, on some of these models there's a copper line inside of the said green tube. So it can't be glowing because why would a sheath around copper be glowing and the copper not be glowing? There was also the choice of 2 metal tones on the guns. The colors aren't what bother me, but rather where the separations occurred. So for my miniatures, I decided that these sections would match this section, and this section would match these sections. The brighter metallic for the barrel with the glowing spheres would also be easier to add highlights to as well. I couldn't come up with an idea for the green cable in the end, so I just painted it green. However, I did not make it glow. In my mind, it's just a green protective cover over a thick copper conduit. And before any of y'all hardcore 40k folks yell at me about the heresy of my decisions, I mean, come on. It's Necrons. We're already heretical. After a lot of the heavy work was completed, specifically all the damage highlighting, I decided to work on the bases as a break, gluing some assorted rocks here and there. I then sprayed EK Interactive's Lunar Desert all around, covering the rocks as well so that they match in color. One important thing I'll note is that for the large boulders, if you want them to look like boulders and not just a sudden hill, make sure you remove excess paste from around the bottom of it, or push it under. That way it will look like a large rock sitting on the ground and not just part of the ground itself. If you have trouble handling the texture paste, as I also experienced, mix a few drops of water with it and in a separate container. This will make it easier to spread around. After it dries, you can come back with undiluted texture paste and dab a little here and there to make the ground rougher and reduce a smooth or muddy appearance. The last thing I had to decide on the miniatures was what was I going to make glow. I did some googling and settled on choosing between these reference photos. Already there were some contradictions. Reading a couple of forums also did not help. Some artwork depicts the coils as glowing. Some depict the ribs hollows were glowing as well. And then some folks said the ribs shouldn't glow and others said they should and blah blah blah. Ultimately I said I bought these things and I'm gonna do what I want. I decided the coils and cables would not glow, but the eyes, the rib hollows, and the spheres on the barrels would. The final deviation I made from my plasmacite formula was that I removed a step of matte white before I began adding the greens. I still add matte white, but this time only one time, instead of twice at different opportunities. The gloss varnish step here, just as an aside, will help fill any uneven spots that the larger pigments in the white paint can create, making it smoother. That way, when the speed paint is spread over it, there will be less imperfections made visible by the speed paint pooling in those recesses. I think I may also try removing the shamrock green step in my next Necron video, instead doing the OSL only with jungle green. Or more than likely, I'll do a side-by-side comparison and try one model one way, and the second the other. I finish off the models by gluing on some White Army Painter tufts and tipping them with Moon Lake Coral Speed Paint. I chose purple for a reason, and that'll be revealed later on once I do a few more Necron videos, as it will all tie into a bigger plan in the future. I then black out the base, and I call it quits. This is the end result. All in all, it took me nearly 24 hours to assemble and paint these 10 models with these steps, with the bulk of the time going into edge highlighting. The steely bits took a lot longer than the coppery bits, believe it or not. The glowing effects on the rib hollows were also difficult due to the arms being in the way, but it can be done. Another thing I wanted to note was that the metallics, before any speed paints were applied, were done with a brush for one of these models. The other 9 I used an airbrush for, and you cannot tell the difference in the end. I chose to use a brush for this video because not everyone has an airbrush and I wanted this to be more accessible to a wider audience. For lessons learned, I absolutely need to slow down before applying speed paints over larger smooth surface areas, ensuring that I get clean strokes and even edges. The same can be said about my edge highlighting. I need to get these cleaner and thinner. I also will not be using poppy red as a shade for my Necron army going forward. And that will bring this video to its inevitable close. I hope you learned something or were inspired to start your own 40k army. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.